And we definitely think that all of these whiskeys answer the question, what does Virginia taste like? And the answer is hella good.
Hi, I'm Kara Oakleaf.
And I'm Suzy Rigdon, and you are watching, instead of just listening, to the Fall for the Book podcast. We're doing a special video episode today with author Shelley Sackier. She's the author of Make It a Double, a memoir of all delicious whiskeys and those experiences. And I'm also here with Gregg Wilhelm. He's the director of the MFA program here at George Mason University.
We're so excited to have both of you here. Thanks for being here.
I am thrilled to be in such good company. Thank you for inviting me and allowing me to speak today.
And congratulations on the publication of your memoir. You're also the author of 3 other acclaimed books. I want to mention their titles and their genres because it's very interesting, your resume as a writer. Your first book, Dear Opal, was a middle grade.
Yep.
The Freemason's Daughter, historical fiction. The Antidote, fantasy, and then of course the latest one, Make It a Double, a memoir. Why a memoir? What has convinced you to sort of put your story out there?
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20, right? So I think I have always been a massive fan of writing fiction because in my mind, I get to lie for a living. Who doesn't think that's a great idea? Just sort of given a pass. Writing nonfiction was never in my future. My idea of like, oh, this is how I want to become, structure my author trajectory. It just was sort of one of those things that other people did. Other people who were, much more academic minded and experts in their field and whatnot. And I remember being at a point where this book was in its proposal stage. And that was another thing that I found out. Having been, a fiction writer, you don't have to write a proposal for a book. But for a nonfiction, that is definitely a serious chunk of time that you give up of your life. And so much research goes into it. I remember contacting my agent at one point and saying, if ever I come to you with a manuscript and say, I've got a great idea, here's my next nonfiction book, then you're going to say, did you fall down the stairs and hit your head? Because nonfiction for me is incredibly challenging. Writing a proposal and creating a business plan and trying to understand the demographics of who's going to be reading it, what's your audience, their shoe size, getting a urine sample from everybody, just so you know what are they going to be interested in buying when your book comes out. That's really challenging. And so that was not my forte, but the book wrote itself. So it was one of those things where I never anticipated writing a memoir. And it was just life experiences that finally had accumulated to a point and been interesting enough to capture the interest of not only my agent, who is a very, very serious, heavy gate to go through, but then, a publisher who said, yeah, I think we could put this together in story format and someone's going to buy it. So there we are.
We should also mention that you're the Director of Distillery Education, which is an awesome job title.
It is.
At Reservoir Distillery in Richmond, Virginia. How much of it was also sort of to take a stance against of what many people might perceive as a boys' club when it comes to drinking whiskey?
Drinking whiskey has always, for a very long time, definitely been an all-boys kind of clubhouse. And it's only been recently, in the last several years, that women are muscling their way through in order to say, I feel confident, this is something I want to try, there should be no stigma attached to it, and it's going to be fun, I want to learn about it, and I want to learn about myself and what I like. Now, working within the industry of whiskey is equally as hard, if not just a little bit harder, I think, still at this point. I don't think it's going to be that way always, but it's very difficult just muscling your way through a male-dominated industry to, get a foothold, to tell people that, the only reason that you are here is because you are filled with curiosity and you want to have that satiated, and you think that after that education has become part of who you are, you then pay it forward. And that is so much of my job at Reservoir, is to be able to wipe away some of the discomfort and the difficulty that I had as number one, being a woman who was interested in drinking whiskey, and then number two, being of that gender, wanting to work in that industry and feeling like I have something to contribute. So yeah, I'm just going to keep doing that.
Great.
So we're all sort of coming into this. We're going to be doing a nosing and tasting today. We're all sort of coming into this with very different backgrounds and comfort levels with whiskey. I have very little experience. I'm a white wine drinker, so I'm excited for this because this is just not an area that I'm normally in.
Well, the rule is the more whiskey you have, the more comfortable you become with whiskey. So
excellent. So we'll do this all the time. That will be the new part of the job. Just to kind of get some establishing levels. Gregg, what's your comfort level with whiskey?
$18 to $24 on most weeks, and then I'll treat myself to like some Woodford Reserve or some Whistle Pig or some Basil Hayden and stuff like that on special occasions. But
so you're kind of an American whiskey guy.
Yeah.
All right.
I've always liked bourbon. Bourbon I'm good with, like Buffalo Trace and Whistle Pig are both ones that I like. But I'm very, very limited knowledge, and I'm big on like old fashions. Like old fashions my drink.
A cocktail kind of girl.
Yes. So, since we're coming from these different backgrounds, different comfort levels, we'd love to hear, a little bit about how did you get into whiskey? Because you talked a lot about, your position in breaking into the boys club, but why whiskey? And then also, why should we and everybody at home, because you can do this tasting along with us, why should we all get into whiskey?
Well, I was 22, a fresh 22, when I had my very first handshake with brown spirits. And very much a rule follower, kind of a thing where I just wasn't interested in alcohol or spirits in general until I was nearly married. I was about to be married, and my fiance took me to Scotland. He was an Englishman, he still is. But he had family in the UK, and so we visited them in London, went our way up to Scotland, and were traversing around, all these beautiful architectural finds, the castles, the gleaming locks, and eating my entire body weight in meat pies and heavy ales. It was just awesome. And then, of course, spotting the Highlander in full regalia, that's just, equally as exciting. And he said, you have to, absolutely, you're here in Scotland, we have to go to a distiller. That's what everybody does. And you kind of have to cut your teeth on single malt scotch, see how it's made. And so we went to this beautiful little distillery on the west coast of Scotland in the Highland area called Oban. And as one does, you go through the tour, and at the very end, you're given a dram of that beautiful elixir that they have crafted, and you are told just how lucky you are to be on the spot where they are making this incredible drink. And I took a sip and immediately became the female doppelganger of the green Mr. Yuck sticker. That sticker that parents put on poisons that are beneath your bathroom and kitchen cabinets that you don't want your children to drink. But I thought I had been duped. I really thought that, who would think that this was some sort of delicious liquid, and why would anybody be conned into taking a second sip of it? It was just horrible. It was very unpalatable to me, sharp and smoky and spicy and things that were just so offensive to my uninitiated taste buds. And so my soon-to-be husband then just ushered me out of that tasting room because I was like, this is crazy, He was like, out we go. So that night we were in this beautiful country house hotel outside of Edinburgh called Balbirnie House. And the barkeep, we were looking at these lovely menus for dinner. And dinner, in Scotland, the UK, can take like 3 hours long. There's no show afterwards. It's just dinner. And so the menus are massive, and the barkeep comes over and says, while you're looking at the menu, can I interest you in maybe having a dram just to keep warm? And my soon-to-be husband turned to the barkeep and he said, do not waste your precious liquid on her tongue. She is so uneducated. It's embarrassing. And the barkeep he clutches his chest and he's standing back and he's like, well, what did you give her? And he's like, I gave her a dram of Oban. You would have thought I was giving her a dram of poison. And the barkeep said, well, you did. You did. You really messed up there because you don't start somebody on that end of the flavor spectrum. I did not know that there was a flavor spectrum for whiskeys, or certainly for Scotch as we were drinking them. And he said, I'm going to give you something else that I think is definitely going to appeal to your palate. It's going to be a whiskey from the Garden of Scotland, from the lowland region of the country. It's referred to as a lady's malt. So he brings out this bottle called Glenkinchie and pours the liquid and noses it himself, and he's just, his eyes are, you know, rolled up in the back of his head, and he's just in a dreamy state, and he said, vanilla and cheesecake and flowers. And I said, oh my godfathers, you're making it sound like a marmalade cosmopolitan. Hand it over. So he gives it to me, and he says, now don't drink it too fast, right? Just let it sit in your mouth for a little bit and breathe in. And I was tentative, put it beneath my nose, and I turned to my husband, I said, well, it doesn't smell like turpentine. I think we're pretty good. So I took a sip of that, and then in that moment, it was magical because it was evocative of all the things that we had been doing during the past many weeks as we were traveling around Scotland, right? Suddenly I was remembering all the food that we'd eaten, all the music that I'd heard, and the stories and the pubs that were being told, and the archaeological ruins of the castles and the stone circles and fairy rings, and you know, all I could see was just men in kilts, and it was really romantic. So that moment, that man, because of his patience and his enthusiasm, he made a giant 180 in my life, right? Where I had said, I will never have this liquid again, to suddenly, I wanted to know how it was made. I wanted to know the science behind it, the engineering behind the mechanics of the production room floor, and I wanted to go to every single distillery and see how they made that magic come into that glass.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned remembering the stories. Do you think there's a strong connection between the sharing of stories over in pubs over a glass?
Absolutely. I think that goes with food and drink. Over and over again in my life, and I'm sure in many people's lives, you have an experience where you're sharing a meal, or you're sharing a bottle of wine, or something else, and it is elevated simply because of the company that you keep, or the environment that you happen to be in. You know, the smells are just as important as the visual aspect of where you are. And we all know that our comfort level is so reflective of you know, how we feel inside is sort of how we are outside. Like if this room were just a bunch of pillows and whatnot, we would all sort of be a lot more relaxed and snoozing our hair down and everything. But you know, there are certain places where your drink is reflective of the memories that you're creating with those people, with that place, and all the things that go with it. So yeah, stories, definitely.
Wow. We're excited to make some new memories here and taste all of these things that you've brought from your distillery.
Yes. So Reservoir Distillery is where I work, yes, as the Director of Distillery Education. And we've been around since 2008. And we're the third distillery outside of Kentucky to make bourbon. So we're really always very excited to champion that. And we make all different kinds of whiskeys, but this is our founding line. So we make 100% single grain whiskeys. So it's 100% wheat and corn and rye. And we do that for myriad reasons, but specifically the two that I always like to share with people is that it gives you an opportunity to see what that pure grain tastes like. And then number two, to see if that flavor appeals to your palate, right? So most of us, when we are out there tasting different brown spirits, specifically whiskeys, a mash bill is made up of all different kinds of grains. So if you have if you're a bourbon fan, then you'll see that there's, you know, there's corn and there's rye and sometimes barley in there, and every once in a while they'll throw in wheat, but it's just rocking horse manure rare to find a whiskey that is made up of a single grain, like it is in Scotland for single malt Scotch, that is just barley. So I love being able to taste people through this. It's very much an educational experience for themselves as they are, you know, learning as to whether or not they like it. So we're going to start off with the wheat whiskey. So with our lesson number 1, so the wheat whiskey is, we're always really happy to tell people that in 2019, Cigars Lover magazine awarded us Whiskey of the Year. Just, one of those little pats on the back that we always think, yay, let's share that. But wheat whiskeys typically are used as a softening grain, a flavoring grain in mash bills. So they tend to make whiskeys smoother. This wheat whiskey is silky and smooth and savory and buttery, and I always refer to it as a gentle gem because it's perfect for people who are inexperienced in barrel-aged bourbons. Now, that said, if you are ever out in the wild and you have a chance to try a wheat whiskey, definitely make sure that it's the first one that you try because its delicate palate is going to be wiped out by palate fatigue if anything else goes in front of it. Lesson number 1 is eyeing the glass. So color, viscosity, and clarity. We'll start with color. If you hold up your glass to a light or to a white background, you will see that the color of a whiskey spans the spectrum from gin clear, that's the new make distillate coming right off the still, to a deep and beautiful mahogany or a treacle color. Now, color can identify the type of cask that's used or the time spent in said cask. Because remember that alcohol is a solvent, and so it leaches pigments and tannins from the wood. And so typically the longer that a spirit resides inside a cask, the deeper the hue derived from wood contact. The next thing that we're looking at is viscosity, and I like this one. So again, you're going to hold up your glass and give it a good swirl. Try to coat the sides of the glass as much as you can. Sometimes I'll tilt my glass if I want to. And then you watch the legs. Those are the drizzly bits that fall from the rim of the glass back into the bowl. Now, viscosity is simply the measurement of a whiskey's thickness, but some people believe that there are some things that you can learn from a viscosity. If those legs are slow, that may indicate that you have a whiskey that is older. If those legs are long and unbroken, that may indicate that you have a whiskey that is higher in alcohol. Now, these two statements are still being debated within the science realm, but until they're proven or disproven, and I'm always watching for the white papers, then it's still a really great idea for you to be looking at the viscosity, because if nothing else, it's a window into that mouthfeel, right? About what it is that's about to be on that first sip. So the last thing we look at in lesson number 1, eyeing the glass, is clarity. And some distilleries are going to choose to chill filter a whiskey in order to remove any sediment or cloudiness that may naturally occur within the whiskey making process. The argument against doing that is that by doing so, you might be stripping the whiskey of some of its most flavorful compounds, its congeners. And another note, we do not do any chill filtering here at Reservoir. We want to keep as much flavor as we can inside those bottles and inside your glasses. Okay, so we will start with lesson number 2, which is nosing the glass, and we're going to use our bourbon, which again is 100% corn. So just a little bit about this particular whiskey. It is sweet, but not as sweet as a typical bourbon. It's very oak forward. It's 50 to 80% of the flavor profile of this bourbon is from the cask itself, which is really important to note. Also important to note is that we are not trying to recreate anybody else's recipe. We're not trying to recreate a Kentucky bourbon or a Tennessee whiskey. Legislatively, that is impossible. But also, why would we want to, right? We're here in Virginia, and Virginia's flavors are unparalleled. So on this patch of earth, we're absolutely thrilled to be working here. All of our grains come within 45 miles of our distillery. We love our farmers. We love the grains that our farmers are creating, the flavors of them. We go so far as to cut down trees in Virginia and have them made into casks. We send them to our coopers and have them make our casks because a lot of flavor comes from the wood. So we just fully stand behind, and the climate as well within our warehouse. It all impacts the flavors of these whiskeys. So we believe in the power of provenance, absolutely. And we definitely think that all of these whiskeys answer the question, what does Virginia taste like? And the answer is hella good. So we'll use the bourbon for our lesson number 2, which is nosing. So I always tell people that when first making that initial handshake with a brand new spirit, whiskey or otherwise, it always helps to pair it with the right shaped glass. Glassware is really important. Then thereafter, once you've had your meet and greet with that spirit, you've made friends, you brought it home to meet your family, set a date, everything is going great, you really like it, then drink it out of whatever container floats your boat. Just sippy cup, coffee mug, just shove a straw right through the bottleneck, no judgment. But that very, very first initial sip is definitely going to be enhanced by the proper shape of glass. And for whiskeys, tulip-shaped glasses are what you're looking for. So this is called the Glencairn glass. There are smaller versions called Copidas, but these work really well. Any small, narrow opening is going to be perfect because the shape of that glass is going to take those aromatic compounds, they're going to narrow them to that tiny little opening, and then direct it right through your nasal passages to high in the nasal cavity. You have a small patch of tissue called the olfactory epithelium. And this tiny patch, it's about the size of a postage stamp. It houses around 400 of your body's olfactory receptors. It's not a whole heck of a lot of a big number. It doesn't impress people when you're like, oh yeah, compare us to our canine or feline friends. But I'll just throw a little science at you to change your mind. Those 400 receptors are combining with single molecules and combinations of aromatic molecules, and altogether can allow your body to identify anywhere between 100 million and 1 trillion different odorants. Right?
Wow.
That is nothing to sneeze at. That is a really bad pun. But to each his own. Today what we're doing is we're just passing it beneath our nose repeatedly and frequently because the aromatic compounds within that liquid are going to reveal themselves to you one by one based on their volatility. So the primary odorant in that liquid is going to go through your nose, light up a neuroreceptor in your brain, and basically that's all it's going to glam onto for a couple of good solid seconds. Nothing else is going to happen until that neuroreceptor grows fatigued, in which case then it will grow mute, which is a really, really cool thing. And because you are all incredibly good students, you're still doing this, aren't you? Repeatedly and frequently, because now your body has an opportunity to recognize the secondary and the tertiary aromas as they are making their way up to your brain. It's really important. Now, there are people who will come to me and say, it doesn't matter what method I use for nosing a spirit, all I'm getting is a face full of alcoholic fumes. And it might be that, they're not using a tulip-shaped glass and those ethanol, fumes are just emanating from the glass, or it might be that they have an exceptionally sensitive nose. Totally fine, because I have a little trick for that. And it's really fun, and it's very revealing, so everyone participate in this at home. Take a finger, hopefully it is clean. If it's not, ask to borrow somebody else's, and dip it into the whiskey, and then dab it onto the back of your hand, anywhere that you don't have like perfume or skin cream that has an odorant on it, and then blow on it until that patch disappears. So it takes a couple of seconds, and then give it a couple of good sniffs.
It smells sweet.
Yes.
And now you will be able to identify those aromatic compounds so much easier on your skin because the alcohol has evaporated from your skin and what's left is just the aromatic compounds. And basically what we're doing here is we're just asking ourselves, what am I smelling? So maybe it smells sweet to you. But define sweet, right? Sweet is a very broad term. Is it sweet like vanilla or like flowers or honey, right? Or maybe the spirit you happen to be trying at some point is smoky, right? But again, big umbrella, broad term. So is it smoky, tarry-like, or burning rubber, or sweet campfire-like, or tobacco-like, right? There's so many different ways that we can drill down into that language because we all love language, and just give it a bit more descriptive effort because it just behooves you to.
I think it's so funny. It's so interesting to me the way that folks just describe drinks. I think the funniest way that I've heard something described is like, it smells like a freshly opened package of tennis balls. And I'm like, that is a very
specific.
It's a very specific smell, but I think, and I don't know if I would want to drink something that smelled like tennis balls, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but as soon as you said vanilla, I was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm smelling.
Well,
I think.
Now you bring up a really good point, because as human beings, we tend not to make a practice of memorizing scents like our other animal friends do. And so when we are, when the object that we are associating with a specific scent is absent, we get a little cranky, right? We're like, I know it, I just can't articulate it. And that's why we use these guys right here. These are called aroma wheels. And I make them specifically for all of our whiskeys, but you can find them, generally speaking, online, or some other distilleries will make them as well. But basically all they are just based on the ingredients in that mash bill. They sort of have a list of certain scents that you might be able to jog your memory with. You're like, oh, that's what I'm getting. It's vegetative, that's green pepper, right? So you can just sort of help yourself, but you can also practice memorizing scents more at home. All right, so we will move into the rye, and lesson number 3 is tasting. And just a tiny bit about the rye whiskey. It's sharply spiced, but not too sweet. See, very, very mild terms I'm using to describe it, so it's not necessarily giving you a feel for what you should be getting. But it's very terroir forward. The rye from Virginia tastes different than Midwestern rye grains or Canadian rye grains, which lots of people are familiar with, so that's why it's great to go out there and taste different distilleries with their different mash bills and see if you can't taste what that patch of earth tastes like. So it is twice as expensive. This grain is twice as expensive for us to purchase and procures about 40% less alcoholic yield. It gums up all the machinery. It's very finicky to work with, which begs the question, why are we making rye? Right? But the proof is in the pudding. It is such a complex and bold spirit. It definitely dominates over the wheat and the bourbon expression. Dave Cutno, who's Reservoir's founder and CEO, he's the proprietor. He always fondly refers to the Reservoir rye as the Adult Swim whiskey of our group. And I'm I'm always so happy to say that this guy gets an extra pat on his back because he was the very first whiskey of ours to be awarded double gold by the San Francisco Spirit Competition. But all of these whiskeys have gotten double golds. It's just, cheers to you for getting it in there first. So, all right, we use the rye whiskey as for our lesson number 3, which is tasting. Everybody's favorite. So whiskey strength varies from bottle to bottle, and it behooves everyone to take a look at the label and identify what that strength is before that very first sip. Typically a label is going to be 80 to 100 proof, unless it's written as cask strength, in which case it's going to be like 100 to 130 plus proof, and that category will surely scrape the tartar off your tongue. Yeah.
Well, I've definitely noticed that we've gone from the wheat, which was golden, to the corn, which was more tawny, and this is really red.
Yeah.
So all the color comes from the cask and whatnot. So char is what creates this beautiful hue that you see, and most whiskeys have. I don't know if you're familiar with what char means, but basically for the uninitiated, we take a barrel and our coopers will set it on fire. The inside is actually a flame, and it can go for anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds or 15 to 20, depends on the level. So basically, they use a 1 to 4 char scale. Ours is a 6 to 7. So we keep those barrels on high flame for just over a minute. And we do that specifically. Our char is called an alligator char. And so after that barrel has been on fire for that long and it cools down, it embers into this beautiful blackened, silky, shiny kind of wood, and it actually looks like alligator skin if you're looking at it. But it's done specifically because it's breaking through all the layers of the wood, the components of the wood, into getting the nooks and crannies. And inside wood chemistry is fascinating. I don't know if you're as crazy about it as I am, but certainly there are so many flavors that you can access from those organic compounds within the wood. So we want to grab all those sugars, those tannins, the pigments, and things like that. And having all those cracks and crevices allows us to sort of reach in deeper. But along with that comes the beautiful color. If when you first take that initial sip, if your tongue prickles as the liquid passes over it, here's where I suggest people to play with it. And by play with it, I mean add water. Just a few drops at a time, because anything more than that is going to break apart the structure of the whiskey. But the benefit of also adding water is that it also makes all these aromatic compounds bloom inside your glass. So it's even more of an aromatic festival that you're having right there. It's extra bonus. And then now we're on to lesson number 4, which is the finish. And I always think the finish is exceptionally great for people who are, massive lovers of words, because this is where we get to use language in order to describe that last part once you've swallowed the whiskey, right? So terms to describe a whiskey's finish are oftentimes language like long or dry or clean or fresh or lingering. But everybody can choose their own verbiage, whatever works for them. I would just hope that they'd stay away from words like yuck and horrid and awful, in which case, maybe your glass is dirty and you should go wash it, or maybe you're drinking really, really bad booze and life is too short for horrible hooch. So the last thing that we look at in lesson number 4 with the finish is the where and the when. So where does flavor show up, right? Is it in your head, in your nose, in your mouth? Is it in the initial entry or the mid palate or way in the back of your throat towards, the nasal cavity? And how long does it last, right? That's the when part. Is it showing up like fast and like a firecracker and then it flashes and disappears right away? Or does it linger and last and develop and evolve into something long after you've already swallowed that spirit? And so there we have it. Those are the 4 lessons with our 3 founders line of whiskeys. And now you're all professionals and you may go out and teach.
Well, it's been really fun tasting all of these. We wanted to ask you too, because our festival always takes place in October. So
yes,
we would love to hear your recommendations for a good fall drink for Fall for the Book.
I do have a really, really good fall drink. In fact, I brought something just to show. So I was talking with our resident publican, Mike Hanbury, and I'm like, tell me what it is that you're planning to do in October. And he's like, oh, I'm going to be making a ginger old fashioned, which to me, I'd never had before. And I'm one of those people who either, love ginger or hate it. It either tastes wonderful to me or like soap. Like I've said a bad word and my mother's washing my mouth out. But the ginger old fashioned is super easy to make, according to Mike, and I've tried it myself at home as well. He's using the rye, so he's using a nice spicy rye for that old fashioned. It's 2 ounces of rye, and then he says you have to find yourself a beautiful ginger liqueur. So the one that he uses is a Domaine de Canton, which is made with baby ginger and Tahitian vanilla beans and honey from Provence, and then a lovely cognac. And I'm thinking, I'm just going to have this in a glass. And then lastly, so there's 3/4 of an ounce of that guy in there. And then he adds 3 shakes of an orange bitter. Here it is, orange bitter. I like this one, the Bitter Truth. This little Cocktail Travelers set is great. It goes with me absolutely everywhere I travel. Wow. It's really, really clever. And then he just shakes all that over ice, and he expresses an orange peel over it. And I said, could we rim it with maple syrup? And he's like, yeah, you can rim it with maple syrup. but that's very, very fallish. Anyway, but there we are. That's a ginger old fashioned.
Great. That sounds amazing. That's what we're going to be toasting with after
this
year's festival.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Shelley, for being here.
Cheers,
and
prost. And,
yes. Oh, well, we all have to have some sort of a toast with our whiskeys, right?
Yes.
Do you all have favorite ones?
Na zdrowie.
Ah, Polish. Me too. Since I wrote an entire chapter about toasts in there, I usually try to keep 1 or 2 of them in my back pocket. One that I really like, and I always use for Burns night when I get to be the lassie who delivers the retort to the lads. It is, here's to the man who loves his wife and loves his wife alone. For there's many a man who loves another man's wife when he ought to be loving his own. But I think the nicer one, and if we want to bring the Irish into our realm of whiskey, is when sliding down the banister of life, may the splinters always go in your favor.
Excellent.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Thanks for the lesson. And congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you again for being here, and thanks to all of you at home for joining us, and we hope you'll taste some of Reservoir's whiskeys.
Yes, come visit us, please. We'd love to see you.
Read on and drink up.